Today we're going to have a look at translocation. And translocation, as we know, is the transport of food, or mainly sucrose, an amino acid, through the phloem tissue. So just as a quick recap, let's look at the different parts of the phloem tissue. So we have two types of tissues or cells here. We have the sieve tube element, which has these perforated trans walls to be able to transport sucrose in multiple directions. Then we also have the companion cells, and these are fully functioning cells with a nucleus and cytoplasm and mitochondria and everything. And these cells help with the transport of sucrose into the sieve tube element. Now, there's also other cells that are surrounding the phloem cells, and in these cells photosynthesis and other chemical processes will occur that would produce sucrose or amino acids. The sucrose would then move from cell to cell until they get to the companion cell. They will then enter the companion cell, and through a few processes and the use of ATP, meaning that this is an active transport, the companion cell will then transport the sucrose molecules into the sieve tube element. Now remember that active transport is the transport from a low concentration to a high concentration, or more that the concentration gradient doesn't really matter, but energy and transport proteins are needed. So some research have shown that water also plays a role in the movement of sucrose through the phloem. So here where the sucrose enters the sieve tube element, the water potential will be very low because there's a lot of ions and different other molecules that are present. This means that water will be able to move through osmosis into this area. This will increase the hydrostatic pressure. So it increases the water pressure in the sieve tube element at this point, and it pushes it in a different direction. In our example, it pushes it downwards. When it gets to the point where it needs to be unloaded, the sucrose molecules will then, again through active transport and the use of ATP, be transported to the companion cell. The companion cell will then unload the sucrose into surrounding tissues that might need the sucrose for other processes or just to store the sucrose. Now, this is where we get to learn two more terminologies. So the cells that create the sucrose and then transport it towards the phloem is called the source. And the cells that receive the sucrose, that either uses the sucrose or then changes it into other molecules, or maybe like to store the sucrose, is then called the sink. Now the source and the sink do not have definite types of cells that are involved in them. They change as the seasons change and also as the maturity of the plant changes. So let's look at a few examples and situations where the source and sink will differ. If we look at the start of the life cycle of a plant, when we plant a seed, there's a source of sucrose and amino acids inside of the seed. This would be the source, as this is the storage. The amino acids and the sucrose would be moved from the seed to leaves and stems and roots that need to be produced. If we look at a plant that's busy blooming or that is in bloom, we know that it would need energy to produce the flower. Now remember, flowers are very important for plants because they help with sexual reproduction. So what would happen in this instance is sucrose would be moved from a source, which would probably be the leaves or even a storage organ, to the flower or the flower bud to produce the flower and to help it bloom. Another life cycle in a plant that's very important is the production of fruit, and this is just after the fertilization of the flower. Now during this phase, sucrose would be moved from the leaves or from a storage organ like the roots to the fruit. where it would be used to produce the seeds as well as the flesh of the fruit. But different seasons also play a role in the use of sucrose and the different source and sinks of the plant. In spring, the mature sunlit leaves are the primary sources of sugars, which is produced through photosynthesis. Now, as the weather warms up and the daylight increases, photosynthesis becomes more efficient, leading to a greater production of sugars like sucrose. Now, some storage organs like rhizomes can also act as sources in the spring, which can also provide energy for new growth that's needed by the plant. Now, sinks, like we said, are the parts of the plant that require the sugar for growth and development. Now, in spring, these can include roots, which are actively growing and absorbing water and nutrients, as well as new leaves and shoots, which are expanding and developing, and then flowers, seeds, and fruits that are also developing. So remember, during spring, as the plant emerges from dormancy and begins new growth, the demand for sugars in these sinks organs increase. We then move to summer, where the mature leaves now become the source, producing sugars via photosynthesis, and the roots become the sinks. They will store the excess sugars made by the leaves. The excess assimilates are stored in the roots to prepare for the next season, which would be autumn. Now, as the days shorten and the temperatures drop, photosynthetic rates in leaves will decrease, meaning that less sugar will be produced. But leaves still remain the primary source for translocation. Now, many plants start to age and die, so their leaves fall off. This can also be seen as a shift in the source activity. The plants prepare for winter by storing sugars in their roots, their stems, and other storage organs. Now, these organs become the primary sinks as the season progresses. Now, the source and the sink activity are not static. They change throughout the plant's life cycle and in response to environmental conditions as well. Let's have a look at the last season, winter. So in winter, there is less light for photosynthesis. The plant will rely on stored sources, primarily sugars stored in the roots. This is because the plant or the trees has lost all their leaves. Now these roots then become the source, providing sugars for the rest of the plant. Now organs that require sugars for respiration, such as the leaves, can become sinks in winter. While leaves may not be actively photosynthesizing, they still require energy for basic metabolic processes. For trees that do not have leaves, the stem and other branches still need sugar as a sink.